The Buddha has just passed away into the great Parinibbana. He has not appointed a successor. Amongst the cries and murmurs, one voice rings out. Thank goodness he's gone. Now we can do what we want. This was the voice of Sabada. Sabada was a monk developed in age and young in development. Mahākassapa heard this. His ears perked. He realized at that moment that the Sangha would dissolve. The Buddha's teachings would dissipate if proper organization was not executed. And so he called a council of 500 arahants. Arahants are fully liberated beings. They follow the path to enlightenment, versus the Buddha discovers the path of enlightenment. And so these 500 arahants come together and they develop the Pali Canon. Before Mahākassapa was known by his surname, he was Papali. And Papali was the son of a Brahmin, and this Brahmin owned 16 villages. His mother desperately wanted him to marry, but Papali had decided that after his parents passed away, he would become an ascetic. He would be devoted to them until then. But the mother was not happy with this. She pleaded, and Mahākassapa finally relented. He said, okay, he commissioned this beautiful sculpture of this beautiful woman. And he said, Mom, if you can find a woman who looks this beautiful, who looks just like this, I will marry her. He did not think that that was even possible. But the mother, she was quite wise. She knew that this statue could describe a real woman, a woman who Papali had known in past lives, and he was psychically kind of tuning in to this karmic partner, this perfect match. So she sent out a bunch of Brahmins to go to all the villages and find this woman. And to Papali's dismay, they found her. Her name was Bada Kapilani, and she also was the daughter of a Brahmin. And it was a perfect match. Papali schemed. He did not want to marry. He was not going to let this happen. And so he wrote a letter to Bada Kapilani that he wanted her to marry someone else of equal stature or better, and to live a happy life, because he wanted to go home. He wanted to leave the home life to become an ascetic. Bada Kapilani, of the same mind, wrote a similar letter. But both of these letters were intercepted and replaced with letters of welcome. The parents, they caught on to the ploy. And so the couple were married, but they agreed to a life of celibacy. So they put flowers between them as they slept, a garland of flowers. And if these flowers wilted while they slept, that was an indication that that person on that side of the flowers had given way to lustful thoughts. And so all night, they would stay awake all night, terrified that they would touch the other. And so they took their vow of celibacy very seriously. They wouldn't even look at each other during the day, and they remained aloof to all pleasures of the world. They were dedicated to the life of asceticism even before they had left the home life. When Papali's parents died, they took on the responsibilities of the farm and the villages. One day, Papali noticed that the plow had churned up all these worms and these birds were eating them. Papali asked his laborer, who is responsible for the suffering of these bugs? And the laborer said, "You are, sir." This horrified Papali, and he did not see how the guilt was worth the wealth And so he decided that he was going to renounce his all of his wealth, all of his belongings. He would give it to Bada, and he would go forth into asceticism. On that same day, Bada was with her maids, and the maids had spread out sesame seeds to dry, and all these bugs were coming to eat the sesame seeds, and then all of these birds were coming to eat the bugs. Bada asked her servants, who is responsible for the suffering, who is karmically responsible for the suffering of all of these suffering bugs? And the servant said that she was. This was horrifying to Bada. She realized that with this much karmic burden, she would not be able to lift her head above the waves of samsara for thousands of lifetimes. And it became imperative to her to leave the householder life and to become an ascetic and find the path out of suffering. So once Papali and Bada realized that they were of the same mind, they took up saffron robes, they took their bowls, they shaved their heads, and they left the palace. They crept out silently and as to not be seen. And they went a long time without being noticed until they came upon one of their own villagers. And the villagers wept. They loved them so much, and they felt like they were being orphaned, that their parents were leaving them. But Papali and Bada responded that they have seen the three worlds of hell, earth, and heaven, and all are engulfed in the flames of suffering. And so they must leave and dedicate themselves to their own liberation. And they left the weeping villagers. Papali realized that the villagers might misunderstand their companionship, and they might speak harsh words, they might slander, they might gossip, and they might harm their karma. So Papali, with a mind to protect the villagers, decided that he and Bada at the next crossroads would part ways. And by their great virtue, the earth shook and the sky thundered. After that, Bada went to Savatthi, and she listened to the Buddha's discourses there. There wasn't a female order yet, so she joined an ascetic nunnery. The Buddha praised her for her exceptional capacity to remember her past lives. 100,000 years ago, the 15th Buddha arose. His name was Padumuttara, and during that time, Kassapa's name was Vedaha, and Vedaha was a wealthy landowner, and Bada was his wife. At the time, there was a ceremony, and Vedaha was late, and he shuffled in just in time to see Mahākassapa being declared the third chief disciple and the foremost in ascetic practices. Vedaha was very impressed by this, and he invited the whole Sangha for a meal the next day. And everything was going well, but he saw Mahākassapa. He saw him walking out for alms. So Vedaha approached him. Mahākassapa, he refused. He would not take a meal in the household. He would only do alms. So then the Buddha explains that Mahākassapa, while we in the Sangha, while we in the monastery, we live indoors, we take meals with householders. This monk, he has vowed to live out in the open sky, and to only take alms, to only wander and beg for food. Vedaha was very impressed, very inspired by Mahākassapa. And so he told the Buddha of his aspiration, that he wanted to not only become an arahant, but he wanted to become the foremost in ascetic practices and for a future Buddha. He then invited the monks for an entire week of meals and provided 3-part robes for everyone in the Sangha. And Buddha Padumuttara said, yes, your aspiration will be fulfilled under the future Buddha Gautama. And then Bada was also really inspired. She thought the Bhikkhuni, who was foremost in recalling past lives, was fantastic. She loved her. And the Buddha said that her aspiration would also blossom. So the next part of the story I want to tell is about how Mahākassapa met the Buddha. And so you'll remember when Papali and Bada, when they parted ways, there was an earthquake and there was thunder. Buddha noticed both of these signs and realized that a great meditator was on the way. And so he walked 5 miles and arrived at this thicket. And he sat there, meditated, and imbued the thicket for like 50 yards with light, so that Kassapa would know he was there and he would know that he was his teacher. Kassapa arrived and immediately was like, yes, you are my teacher. He had that discernment. He could see exactly who the Buddha was. He was enlightened. He was liberated. And so they became friends, great friends immediately. And Mahākassapa, I think maybe when he ordained, he became officially Mahākassapa, and he was ordained right then. So Mahākassapa offered a piece of his robe for the Buddha to sit on. And I think it's 3 pieces. So he took one of the pieces and he gave the Buddha to sit on. And the Buddha gave Mahākassapa his robes. So they exchanged robes, which the reason that's important is because this designates Mahākassapa as being very special. The Buddha has a strong bond with him, and when the Buddha passes away, it is expected that the Sangha, the other meditators, the other monks and nuns will respect Mahākassapa as someone that the Buddha has recognized as exceptional. So Mahākassapa gladly receives the robes, and with these robes there's sort of a promise to become Buddha is asking if he is prepared to become the monk of the disciple foremost in ascetic practices, because it is a very difficult life to lead. Kassapa accepted happily because he was so developed, he was so pure, that those ascetic practices were easy for him. They felt uplifting rather than daunting or difficult. They were natural to him. He had been preparing for aeons for this role. The next story is kind of funny. It's about how a couple of angels were just turned down from Kassapa because Mahākassapa only lets the most impoverished people donate food to him, because then that improves this needy person's karma so that they can live a better future. And so he would not allow angels to serve him or to help him or give him alms or anything like that. Saka heard this and he became instantly fascinated. He wanted to give to Mahākassapa. He was very excited. But he knew that he would get turned down, that it would be difficult for him. So he disguised himself as a weaver, as a poor weaver. He approached him. He gave him he donated his food. And Mahākassapa looked at him and he's like, Saka, I know who you are. Saka melted. He's like, I've been caught. And Mahākassapa says, and he said, Saka, I don't take meals from the angels. I only receive donations from the most impoverished people. And we want to give them the opportunity to improve their karma. And Saka says, well, angels need good karma too. then Sokka also asks, so wait, did I get good merit? Like, was that good merit or bad merit? And Mahākassapa said, yes, Sokka, that was good merit. You have received good merit, but I don't want you to do that again. You don't try that again. You must give poor people the opportunity to donate. Okay, so another story about Mahākassapa and almsgiving. So there were lepers, and the lepers were giving him alms, and one of the fingers of the leper dropped into the bowl, and Mahākassapa still ate the offering. He didn't eat the finger. I think he gave it back. But it was very important for him to eat the meal so that the leper would get the good karma, because that was his whole principle, was that it was extraordinarily important to help others improve their situations, and the best way was to provide opportunities for these other people to develop their own virtues and develop those habit patterns, those positive habit patterns, and to then also benefit from their own good karma in the future. And so I thought that was really cool. He also didn't suffer any ill side effects from eating that food that might have been contaminated. So there's just like a robustness to a person who is just that virtuous, that moral, and that dedicated to the improved lives of others. The 500 arahants, yeah, we talked about that earlier. That's about him collecting 500 arahants. Then there's Ananda. Ananda was Sila Sotapanna because he had dedicated his life to being an assistant of the Buddha, and so he didn't get that time to become an arahant. And Mahākassapa's like, we need 500, we'll replace you, but you need to be an arahant to attend this council. But we need you because you have that memory and you've memorized all the Buddhist discourses. So you have a couple days to figure yourself out. And so Nanda worked really hard, and right that morning of the Great Council, he kind of gave up and he went to sleep. And at that moment when he gave up, he also gave up his sense of self, and he became an arahant, and then he became part of the council, and it all worked out fine. Mahākassapa had that. He was very disciplined, and he had that capacity to motivate people. Really, that's his training. That's what he had decided from 100,000 years ago, that he would be the foremost in ascetic practices, the foremost in this discipline. So he had that superpower, and he could conjure that superpower in other people too. Very wonderful mind. Okay, now the death of Mahākassapa, which I don't even know if it's a death. So this was more in the Chinese texts. There's different texts, they have different lengths. The Chinese text, I think, is very long, like 30,000 pages, maybe even 40,000 pages. It's a very long text. In this text, it describes that Mahākassapa was to deliver the Buddha's robes that he owned, who belonged to Gautama before his ordainment. He was destined to bring these to the next Buddha, Maitreya, who's gonna arrive after a few thousand aeons. Not a few thousand aeons, that's too long, but quite a long time. And so he went into this mountain and meditated there. And I guess he passed away, but in meditative sitting posture. Some monks have reported to visit this mountain and see him. And so in the time of Maitreya, this mountain will open up and the robes will be presented to him. He is being preserved. Maybe that's kind of cold in there, helps with the preservation. And yeah, that's the story of Mahākassapa, one of the coolest monks in the Pali Canon. He just has this sort of exquisite discernment. All right. Well, I hope that these stories were fun, insightful, and I want you to be happy. I want you to be peaceful, and have a good day.